When I was 15, my parents told their bowling buddies I was the spare tire. Mom smirked, pointed at me, and said, "Only good when the real one's flat." Dad laughed, and I walked out that night with $25 and a hoodie. 6 years later, they tracked me down. Today, they stood at my shop, pleading for help, tears in their eyes. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Before we jump into the story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment with the city you live in. Now, let's dive into today's story. I was 15, standing in our cramped living room, a tray of stale chips and watery dip trembling in my hands. The air smelled like cheap beer and my dad's menthol cigarettes, the soundtrack of every Saturday night when their bowling league crew invaded our house. Mom was halfway through her third Coors Light, her arms slung around Sophie, my older sister, like she was showing off a trophy. "This one's our pride and joy," she slurred, grinning at the sweaty, red-faced crowd sprawled across our sagging couch. State champ bowler, college-bound, the whole damn package. Sophie smiled, perfect as always, while I shifted my weight, trying to disappear into the peeling wallpaper. Then Mom's eyes slid to me, and her mouth twisted into that smirk I knew too well, the one that meant I was about to be the butt of the joke. "And Lucas here," she said, jabbing a finger at me. "He's the spare tire. Only good when the real one's flat." The room erupted. Laughter bounced off the wood-paneled walls, loud and sharp, like pins scattering in a strike. Dad wheezed the hardest, his gut jiggling under his faded bowling shirt. "Yeah," he piled on, wiping his eyes. "We only kept him because the hospital wouldn't take refunds." More howls, beer cans clinking in a toast to my worthlessness. My face burned, the tray wobbling as my hands shook. It wasn't new. They'd been calling me the spare tire since I was old enough to talk the oops kid after Sophie, their golden girl. But that night, it cut deeper, like a blade finding a vein. I set the tray on the coffee table, the plastic clattering against the chipped wood, and bolted out the back door. The screen slammed behind me, cold October air hitting my face. I had my hoodie, $25 from mowing the neighbor's lawn, and nothing else, no plan, no destination, just the ache of being their punchline for 15 years, and the sudden, wild certainty that I was done. I couldn't stay in that house where every word was a kick to the ribs. That first night, I stood under a flickering streetlight, my breath fogging in the October chill, and stuck out my thumb. A trucker with a grey beard and a thermos of coffee that smelled like burnt diner brew picked me up. He didn't ask much, just dropped me at a truck stop 50 miles from home, where the hum of diesel engines felt like a lullaby. I curled up in a vinyl booth, the kind you'd find in every roadside joint from here to Kansas, and sipped a $1 coffee until the manager, a woman with tired eyes and a smoker's rasp, told me to move along at dawn. My bones ached from the cold, but there was a strange lightness in my chest, like I'd left behind a weight I'd carried too long. I wasn't their spare tire out here. With my $25, I bought a bus ticket to the next city over, not far, but far enough that the bowling alley chatter wouldn't reach. The shelter I found smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies, a concrete box with rows of sagging cots. I lay there, staring at water stains on the ceiling, listening to a man mutter in his sleep about a war I'd only read about in history class. Back home, Sunday mornings meant Mom's pancakes' burnt edges, syrup dripping off the plate, Sophie hogging the bacon. Now it was stale shelter oatmeal, and I missed it more than I'd admit. I got a job washing dishes at a Greasy Spoon, the kind of place where the jukebox still played Johnny Cash, and the waitresses called you honorable. I told them I was 18, and they didn't check. The cash tips, crumpled ones and quarters, kept me going, enough to buy a second-hand coat from the thrift store when November turned bitter. Sophie texted me a week in, her words short but heavy. "They're pissed but not looking hard. Stay safe." I could picture her sitting in her room with her bowling trophies, typing fast before Mum barged in. She'd always been the buffer, the one who'd sneak me a cookie when Dad was ranting about bills, but she wouldn't leave them, not yet. And that left a bruise on my heart I didn't expect. I didn't reply, just shoved my phone in my pocket and scrubbed plates harder, the hot water scalding my hands. The other dishwashers were older guys with stories etched in their wrinkles, lost jobs, lost wives, lost chances. They didn't pry, and I didn't offer. We'd nod over the clatter of dishes, a quiet understanding that life could kick you down and still expect you to stand. Every night, I'd walk back to the shelter, my sneakers crunching on gravel, the stars sharp above the city's haze. I'd think about Mom's laugh, that high-pitched cackle that used to echo through our house when she'd had one too many, and Dad's wheezy chuckle, like he was in on some grand joke I'd never get. Out here, the silence was better not peaceful, just empty. But emptiness has its own weight, and some nights it pressed down until I couldn't breathe. I'd sit on my cot, tracing the frayed edge of my hoodie, and wonder if they'd even notice the quiet where I used to be. Sophie's text said they hadn't, not really, and that cut deeper than the laughter ever did. They'd moved on, like I was a flat tire they'd swapped out and forgotten in the garage. I started saving every penny, hiding cash in a sock under my cot, dreaming of a room with a lock and a window that didn't face a brick wall. The shelter had rules 2 weeks max, so I'd bounce between there and a park bench when my time ran out. Wrapping my coat tight against the wind, I'd see families in the diner, kids spilling ketchup on the table, parents laughing. Soft and tired, and it hit me I'd never had that. Not really. Mom and Dad had Sophie's trophies to polish, a future to brag about over beers. Me. I was the afterthought, the kid they joked about while I cleared their empties. Out here, though, I could feel something growing, not anger, not yet, but a stubborn flicker, like a pilot light that wouldn't go out. I wasn't going back, not to that house where I'd been less than nothing. One night, a dishwasher named Ray, grey hair, hands like sandpaper, slipped me half his sandwich when my stomach growled loud enough to hear over the sink. "You're tougher than you look, kid," he said, and I ducked my head, swallowing the bread and the lump in my throat. Tough wasn't the word I'd use, maybe hollowed out, like a tire with the air let loose. But I clung to that flicker, that promise I'd whispered to myself under the truck stop lights. I'd never be their spare again. I'd build something, even if it was just a life where I wasn't the joke. Out here, with my blistered hands and my $1 scoffy, I was starting to believe I could. A year into my new life, I'd scraped together enough to rent a room in a boarding house, a narrow space, with a lumpy mattress and a window that rattled when the wind kicked up. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and I'd lie there at night, listening to the creak of the old pipes, feeling like I'd finally caught my breath. The diner job had steadied me, and I'd even bought a beat-up radio from a pawn shop, tuning it to AM stations that played Merle Haggard and Patsy Cline songs. My grandpa used to hum while tinkering in his shed. Then Mom pulled the rug out from under me. Sophie emailed one grey morning. She told the cops you ran off with druggies. Said it's why you left. They're not really looking, just making noise. I stared at the screen in the library, my stomach twisting. She'd turned me into a story for the bowling alley crowd, poor her. Stuck with a junkie kid while I was scrubbing grease off plates to survive. The shelter got wind of it, some cop asking questions, and they booted me out, saying they couldn't risk trouble. Back to sleeping in alleys. My coat pulled tight against the damp. I felt her lie like a slap I couldn't dodge. I found Mike a week later, or he found me. I ducked into his auto shop to dodge the rain, curling up in the break room with my soggy socks and a stale granola bar. He walked in, a big guy with grease-stained hands and a voice like gravel, and caught me mid-bite. I braced for a yell, but he just squinted, asked why I wasn't in school. Maybe it was the way he leaned against the counter, casual but steady, like he'd seen worse than a runaway kid. I spilled it all over a cup of his bitter instant coffee, the spare tire jokes. The night I left, Mum's latest stunt, he didn't say much, just handed me a rag and pointed to an old Chevy needing an oil change. "You work, you eat," he said. Next day, he showed me how to swap a spark plug, his radio crackling with baseball scores in the background. It was the first time in months I felt solid, like I wasn't just drifting. Then Sophie's next email landed like a brick through a windshield. "Dad sold your comics," she wrote. "The ones you kept in that shoebox, X-Men or Spider-Man. All of it. Got $200 for a bowling lane membership." I sat on a milk crate outside the shop, the words blurring on my phone. Those comics weren't just paper. They were summers spent biking to the corner store with my lawn mowing money. Hours sprawled on my bedroom floor, dreaming of heroes who fought back. Dad didn't even bowl half the time. He'd just sit at the bar, nursing a Budweiser. I could see him now, haggling with some guy at the pawn shop, my treasures traded for a few nights of bragging rights. It wasn't the loss that hurt most. It was how easy it was for them to erase me, like I'd never been more than clutter in their lives. I didn't cry, but my chest felt tight, like a tire overinflated and ready to blow. Mike noticed I was off, kept dropping tools, staring at nothing. He didn't push, just tossed me a wrench and said, "Fix something, helps." So I did. I tore into engines, learning carburetors and timing belts, my hands black with grease by day's end. He paid me cash enough to get back into the boarding house, and I started night classes for my GED at the community center. The teacher was a retired mechanic, Mr. Ellis, with a limp and a dry laugh, who'd talk about fixing cars like it was poetry. I'd sit there, pencil worn to a nub, working math problems under fluorescent lights, and feel a flicker of pride, small, but mine. At home, I'd been the kid who couldn't measure up to Sophie's trophies. Here, I was the guy who could rebuild a transmission, and that meant something. Nights were still hard. I'd lie awake, the radio low, picturing Mom spinning her druggy tale to her friends, Dad pocketing that $200 without a second thought. It wasn't just anger simmering in me. It was a quiet ache, the kind that settles in your bones like damp cold. I'd think about the Sunday drives we used to take back when I was little, all four of us crammed in the old Buick, stopping for ice cream at the Dairy Queen. Those memories felt stolen now, tainted by how they'd rewritten me out of the story. But Mike's steady nod when I got an engine purring. Mr. Ellis's good work. Lucas on my first test, they were stitches in a wound I hadn't known was there. I wasn't whole, not yet, but I was patching myself together. One greasy rag, one late-night equation at a time. By 18, I'd clawed my way to something steady, a job at Mike's shop, a tiny apartment with peeling paint, but a working stove, and a paycheck that didn't vanish into rent the second it hit my hands. The place wasn't much a single room, with a futon I'd found curbside and scrubbed clean, a thrift store mug with a faded "World's Best Dad" slogan I used for coffee. But when I turned the key each night, it felt like mine, a quiet corner where no one could call me spare. I'd sit by the window, watching headlights streak past, and feel a flicker of something new, not just survival, but possibility. Mike had me doing full repairs now, trusting me with brake jobs and tune-ups, his gruff, nice work landing softer than I'd expected. I started to believe I could be more than the kid they'd laughed off. I met Clara online, in a chat room for car enthusiasts, swapping tips on old Fords. She was a barista studying graphic design, with a quick laugh and a way of asking questions that didn't feel like prying. Our first real talk was over a glitchy video, "Call Me in My Shop" shirt, her with a mug of tea, steam curling up past her glasses. I told her about the bowling alley nights, the spare tire jabs, how I'd left with nothing but a hoodie. She didn't flinch, just nodded, and said her dad used to call her the extra mouth after her mom passed. We got each other two kids who'd been footnotes in someone else's story. Soon, we were texting daily, her sending doodles of cars, me sending photos of engines I'd fixed. She'd tease me about my coffee obsession, and I'd tease her about her artsy playlists, Simon and Garfunkel, drifting through my phone late at night. Sophie's emails had slowed, but one came that spring, short and sharp. "Mum's posting about you online. My lost boy." All tears. "Dad's gambling's worse. They're broke. My old room's a mess of his betting slips now." I scrolled Mum's Facebook on a library computer, saw the grainy photo of me at 14 Gap, toothed and awkward, captioned with "Please for prayers." No mention of the druggy lie or the comics they'd sold, just a sob story for likes. I pictured our house, once cluttered with Sophie's trophies and Mum's bowling league plaques, now a graveyard of crumpled tickets and empty cans. They'd erased me, then dragged me back when the bills piled up. It didn't burn like it used to, just left a dull ache, like a bruise you forget until you press it. Clara changed the air around me. She'd come over after her shifts, smelling like espresso and cinnamon, and we'd sit on my futon, with takeout from the corner Chinese place, greasy egg rolls, and fortune cookies. We'd read aloud, laughing at the vague wisdom. She saw something in me I hadn't, pointed to my JED certificate taped to the fridge, and said, "You should do more with that brain." So I enrolled in community college auto tech classes at night. The classroom smelled like chalk and motor oil. The teacher an old gearhead with stories of fixing rigs in the 70s. I'd hunch over textbooks, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, and feel a quiet pride bloom small but steady, like a tire slowly filling with air. I started saving too, stashing cash in an old tobacco tin, dreaming of a better place, maybe a truck of my own. Nights, I'd lie awake, the futon creaking under me, and think about home not with anger, but a soft, tired sadness. I'd remember the 4th of July barbecues, Dad flipping burgers in his goofy apron, Mom passing out sparklers, Sophie and me chasing fireflies in the yard. Those moments felt like Polaroids now, faded at the edges, and I wondered if they'd ever seen me in them, or just the space I took up. Clara's voice would pull me back, she'd call after her shift, her day spilling out in sleepy murmurs, and I'd feel anchored. She didn't try to fix me, just sat with me in the quiet, and that was enough. Sophie's warning lingered, they were broke. Desperate, but I pushed it down. I wasn't their spare tire anymore. I was building something, calluses on my hands, grades on my transcript, a life that didn't bend to their laughter. For the first time, I could breathe without feeling the weight of their words, and that was a victory I held close, fragile, but real. At 21, I'd built a life that fit me, steady work at Mike's shop, a shared apartment with Clara, where the coffee pot hissed every morning, and a savings account that wasn't just a dream anymore. I'd even bought a toolbox. Heavy with wrenches, I'd polished myself a quiet symbol of what I'd become. Then Sophie called, her voice tight through the crackle of a bad connection. Dad's gambling. They're losing the trailer. They found out I mentioned your city last month. They're coming. I stood in the shop, oil smudging my phone screen, and felt a chill settle in my gut. They'd turned me into a ghost for years, but now, with their backs against the wall, I was their spare tire again. That night, Clara and I sat on our second-hand couch, her hands steady on mine, and she said, "You've got the upper hand this time." She was right. I'd been tracking their trailer's loan online, a hunch from my finance class. When the bank auctioned it cheap, I'd bought it through a shell company, cash from years of overtime. They didn't know their home was mine. 2 weeks later, they showed up at the shop. I was under a pickup, tightening a bolt, when someone tapped my leg. "Folks asking for you." I slid out, grease on my cheek, and there they were, Mom, her hair limp and graying, clutching a purse with a broken strap. Dad, thinner, reeking of stale beer and desperation. Mum's eyes welled up a performance I'd seen 100 times at the bowling alley, and she choked out, "Lucas, we've missed you so much." Dad nodded, his hands fidgeting like he needed a cigarette. I wiped my hands on a rag, slow and deliberate, and asked, "Why now?" The facade cracked. Mum's tears dried fast. Dad's jaw tightened. They spilled at the trailer, eviction looming, debts piling up from his betting. They'd already hit Sophie for $2.0 months back, burned through it on slots and rent, and she'd cut them off. Now they stood in my shop, begging for cash, a place to crash, anything I could spare. I didn't flinch, just watched them squirm under the fluorescent lights, the hum of a tire balancer in the background. Mum tried guilt. "We're your family, Lucas." And Dad mumbled about hard times, but their words felt hollow, like a flat tire spinning on a rim. I'd spent years patching myself together, and here they were, expecting me to prop them up. Clara had seen it coming. She'd helped me dig into the loan paperwork, her sharp mind cutting through legalese. Owning their debt wasn't just power, it was a shield, cold and solid in my hands. I told them, "Meet me tomorrow, diner on 5th, 6 p.m. We'll talk." Mum's face lit up too quick, and Dad muttered a thanks that didn't reach his eyes. They thought I'd cave, like I was still the kid clearing their empties while they laughed. That night, I barely slept. Clara brewed tea chamomile, her go-to for late talks, and we sat at our wobbly kitchen table, planning. I'd bring Sophie, who'd agreed to drive in, and Mike, who'd nodded when I asked. No questions. The diner was neutral ground, a place where I'd eaten countless $5 specials after long shifts, its red vinyl booths worn smooth by years of tired backs. I didn't want them in our home, didn't want their mess staining the life I'd built. As Clara traced circles on my palm, I thought about the toolbox on my shelf, each wrench a step away from their shadow. They'd sold my comics, spun lies about me, left me to fend for myself at 15. Now they stood at my door, hands out, and I felt a strange calm, not rage, but a clarity, like the moment you torque a bolt just right, and it clicks into place. The next day, I walked to the diner early, the air crisp with fall leaves crunching under my boots. Sophie texted she was close, Mike trailing in his old Ford. I reserved the back room, a quiet space, with a single light flickering over a Formica table. When Mom and Dad arrived, I'd be ready, not the scared kid who'd run, but the man who'd learned to fix what they'd broken. They'd grovel, and I'd lay out the truth. Their home was mine, their debt my leverage. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about balancing the years they'd tipped the scales against me. The diner's jukebox kicked on as I waited, some old Hank Williams tune drifting through, and I felt the weight of it all settle, steady and sure, in my chest. I sat in the diner's back room, the air thick with the smell of fried onions and coffee. As Mom and Dad shuffled in, Sophie slid in beside me, her coat still damp from the drive, and Mike took the chair by the door, his work boots tapping the linoleum. Mom's eyes darted, expecting a handout. Dad's hands twitched, restless without a drink. I let them sit, the clink of silverware from the main room filling the silence, then slid the loan papers across the table. "I own your trailer," I said, voice steady as a lug nut tightened just right. Mum's face drained white, Dad's went slack, like a tire deflating. I laid it out. They could have it back if they owned up publicly to the spare tire years. Went to counseling with Sophie and me to face the mess they'd made, and signed a deal never to ask me for a dime again. No foreclosure, no rent, just truth or nothing. Mum's tears came, real this time, not the bowling alley show, and Dad stared at the table, tracing a scratch with his thumb. Sophie spoke up, soft but firm. "You threw him away, and he still built this. Take it." They squirmed, but with eviction a week off, they nodded, signing the papers with shaky hands. Mike watched, his nod a quiet anchor. Later, Mum posted a rambling apology online, half-hearted, still her as the martyr, but it was there. Dad called once, voice rough, asking if I'd visit. I said, "Maybe, but not yet." Counseling started awkward and raw, and I felt the weight shift. Not gone, just different, like a retread tire finding its grip. That night, Clara draped our patched quilt over us, the one she'd sewn from thrift store scraps, and we sat on the couch, her head on my shoulder. Sophie had hugged me hard before leaving, whispering, "You did it." I thought about that 15-year-old kid, $25 in his pocket, running from laughter that cut deeper than he'd admit. They'd sold my comics, spun lies, left me to scrape by on diner scraps and LA nights. But I turned grease into a trade, a futon into a home, a spare into someone whole. Here's what I've learned. The ones who break you don't get to claim your rebuild. It's not about forgiving them. It's about outlasting them, building something they can't touch. You don't owe your worth to those who couldn't see it. You prove it by rolling on, steady and strong, until the road's yours. I'm not happy, not fully, just satisfied, like a tire patched and ready for miles ahead. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through. Family can be a place of love or the deepest kind of pain. If you've ever felt mistreated or taken for granted by those closest to you, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. You never know who else might need to hear your story.